Hello friends and welcome back to the channel. My name is David and in today's video we'll be crafting this messenger bag out of grey leather with some orange leather details and stitching. This bag is the last and largest item of a series of products that a friend of mine asked me to make, and in this video I'll show you how each individual piece was made and which were the steps I took to make this messenger bag from scratch. So if you're planning on crafting one yourself, hopefully you find this video useful. So just as in previous videos, the first thing I did was to create a template for the front, back and side parts of the bag. This template has the stitching holes already marked, so it's way easier to join the front and side parts together later on. Now, since the bag needs to be very large, I had to print the template in several letter size papers and then join them with some masking tape, as you can see here. Once the template is ready, we can move on to line the front part with some orange leather, and since these parts were huge and I'm using a water-based glue, it would have taken me ages to spread it with my fingers, so I used a plastic card instead and began spreading the glue from the center outwards, as you can see here. Then we need to make sure both leathers are well glued together and the glue is evenly spread between them. And using a leather hammer is a good way to ensure this, since the head of the hammer is curved and won't damage or mark your leathers. Once we're happy with that, we can fix our template with some tape and begin making the stitching holes with a pair of hole chisels and a poly mallet. And after that's done, we can cut out the leather to have our front part ready. Now, I mentioned in previous videos that this was not my favorite leather to work with, since it was very soft and thick, and because of that it's better to pass the blade several times to cut out any leather part than trying to cut it out in one go. So if you're working with very flexible soft leathers, my suggestion is to always make sure your blade is well sharpened and try to cut out slowly, passing your knife several times until it completely separates the leather, especially if you're working with some thick pieces like I did here. To cut out the rounded edges, it's best to make small straight cuts in different angles until you get a decent rounded shape. This part can eventually be sanded out once the front and side parts are stitched together, so it's okay if it's not perfectly cut out. To stitch the bag, I used some filo chinois linen thread in orange color, matching the orange leathers used in the bag. And once the upper side of the front part was stitched, I needed to flatten the thread slightly so that it doesn't feel too rough in this part of the bag. Linen thread like this one looks really nice with its round finish. So if you're working with it and wish to keep its appearance, just make sure to hammer the thread carefully, just to make it as even as possible with the leather without losing its volume. For the edges, I went on and used some gray acrylic paint from Angelus, and once the paint was dry, I could burn and polish the edges with a woolen slicker and some burnishing gum. When I started working with these projects, I didn't know if this paint was going to work, but didn't have much time to purchase the heatable edge paint since I had to deliver the bag as quickly as possible, and realized that this paint did a decent job on the edges. Although if you're working on a similar project, I do suggest you use the right product for this particular job. You might want to try out a heatable paint on soft leathers like this one, since they're easier to seal once dry and don't leave a rough surface. So once the front part was ready, we could move on with the loop parts that are going to be stitched to the side part. These loops need to resist the weight of the bag with a strap, which we'll be working on later on. And to do so, I use 4 layers of leathers, as you can see here. And again, we're using some contrasting stitching and acrylic paint for the edges of these small parts. So the next piece is the front flap of the bag, and it was made with the orange leather, and for this particular piece I used a different type of edge paint. A while ago I bought an orange paint from Giardini along with a base coat that seals the edge to avoid that paint feeling rough because of the fibers of the leather, and then applied the orange coat. So the process of making the flap was identical to the rest of the parts. Glue the leathers together, make the stitching holes, cut out the leather piece, stitch the sides, and then move on to paint the edges. Now the result from this edge paint was really nice. It was my first time using this paint while working with the bag and other pouches. The only thing I didn't like about it is how it feels once it's dry. It makes a lot of friction when you pass your hands or fingers on the edge. It's hard to explain, but the best way I can describe it is like when you're walking smoothly somewhere and suddenly the floor is made out of a different material and you already have this inertia on you and it almost stops you and you feel like you're gonna fall or slip. If that makes any sense, then you can have an idea of how this paint feels. So here we're working with the strap of the bag. Since the strap is adjustable, it's made from two parts, and right now we're working with a small one. And again, once we have our leathers glued together and cut out, we need to work with the stitching holes, including those that are going to hold the metal buckle and loop, and also work with the small loops that are going to hold the excess of the long strap in place. To make the hole of the buckle, you can use a small oblong puncher if you have one. In my case, the oblong tool I have is actually very large for this buckle, so I have to use a hole puncher instead. So once the paint of the loops is dry, we can make the stitching holes with a diamond chisel and stitch them together using some cross stitching, as you can see here. Then we can install the metal loops in the strap, insert the leather loops, and then install the buckle. So for the back side, we did exactly the same process as with the front part, except this part is much larger since it includes a flap, and we need to stitch and finish the flap first before installing any other piece. Once we're done with the flap side, we can install the small orange flap and then move on with the middle section and side parts. At this point, we're very close to finishing the bag since most of the pieces are finished by now. So before stitching the side parts to the back side, we need to stitch the leather loops we made previously, and then we can start stitching all the parts together. We're going to start by saddle stitching the side and back parts together, and in between we need to stitch a middle section we did with the orange leather. My friend wanted this section for some large items she crafted out of resin. Once the side and inner parts were stitched together with the back side, we need to paint the edge, and this time we're using a considerable amount of paint because of the combined thickness of leathers. Then once the paint is dry, we'll do the same for the front side and stitch that part along with the front flap of the bag to the rest of the assembly. So at this point we're practically finished. The bag is completely finished, and all we need to do is to install the strap to both sides of the bag. And to do so we need to have the large strap part finished, and here I'm just going to make the holes for the buckle with a hole puncher, then paint the holes with the acrylic paint and polish them with a wooden slicker. And here it is. The messenger bag is now completely finished and filled with some items to see how it looked when full. So friends, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts on this project, and if you wish to see more leather crafting projects like this one, I invite you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done it yet. I post videos on crafting tutorials, do-it-yourself crafts, leather product reviews, and more. Again friends, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Have a great day.